Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here and welcome to this webinar on workations and the compliance risks related to them. So I see already a good number of people joined. Very good. Great to have you here. Hi, good morning, Liva. Maybe start with the housekeeping stuff. You already seen Liva using the chat. You're very much invited to use the chat indeed to post any questions or remarks that you may have. Hi, good morning. I've also received already a couple of questions up front, so that's great. I will go through them, of course, during this session as well. But as said, if there's anything new or add or unclear, please just ask as we go. We've got 40 minutes, and without further ado, I'll just do a quick introduction of myself, and after that also an introduction of the compliance risks that, well, in my view, matter, and then basically open the court for your questions and the questions that we've already received. So my name is Pieter Manden. I'm Dutch. Used to be educated as a tax lawyer a long time ago. Worked at PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, for 13 years. Started off in the Netherlands, but then moved to Germany. My specialism was always around employer compliance when people temporarily or permanently work from another location than the business location. We did move back physically to the Netherlands after a couple of years, but I always remained active for the German firms. That's basically when my remote working life started. And that was also what I got super enthusiastic about back then. Then obviously the pandemic happened. 2 little kids happened also. So I was working more and more remotely, specialty, and of course, due to the pandemic, it was super hot and happening. Change at PwC was not fast enough for me. You can imagine it's a big tanker, a great place to work, but not a great place for quick change. So I decided on my own change, and together with Patrick, I started WorkFlex. So, and at WorkFlex, we offer a solution to compliantly offer workations as a benefit to your people. In the long term, we're even building the work from anywhere compliance platform. So also, as we speak, adding business travelers compliance to our solution. But all right, so today we're talking about workations and then what compliance risks matter when we're talking workations. Maybe really quickly on what is a workation, because it's obviously a new term. I may not really like the word, but it is what it is. Everybody knows it by now. So with a workation, we mean someone works temporarily. So let's, for the ease of sake, say below 6 months. In general, it's much, much shorter than this. So he or she works 6 months from another country than the country where he or she lives and or is employed. So basically, someone goes to Spain, although he or she is employed with a German employer in Germany. And then the stay in Spain has no business purpose. It's fully privately driven. But the fact is that the employee will be working throughout this stay, either full-time or part-time, mixing it up with vacation. Basically, that's what workations are. So very important to remember, there is no business objective. It's privately driven, and the employee will also remain to work for the in the example, German home company. All right, so that's workations. And we're talking compliance risks, and they are very important because, of course, you don't want this. But before we dive into them, I think it's also important to not forget the HR risk of not offering workations as a benefit. Of course, the objective today is to tell and discuss a little bit about workations and the compliance risks related to it. The objective, however, is not to fully discourage you to offer them. I think they are a great benefit. I think if you do it well, you can also offer them compliantly and manage them very nicely. And I think it's also quite important to do it because you want the best talents, you want to give them a great place to work. So definitely not meant here to discourage you to offer workations at all. I think it's very important to emphasize the HR risk that you have if you don't offer it. Competitors will then offer workations as a benefit, and you might actually lose out on the best talent in the market. So don't forget. All right. I don't have too many slides on the compliance risks because I just prefer talking like this and discussing a little bit based on the questions that come in the chat or the questions that I have here in front of me that were already submitted before this. But just to summarize, these are usually the risks, the compliance risks that you have to deal with when you're talking compliance, when you're talking workations. The first one is corporate tax, the risk that the workationer constitute a so-called permanent establishment in the destination country, and as a result, you as the employer would have to register and pay profit tax in that country. The second one is employment tax, or let's say in practice, the requirement to set up a payroll in the destination country for the workationer. Also, of course, something that you don't want. You want to prevent this because the individual is already on the payroll in the home country. The third risk is social security, and this risk is always twofold. First, the risk that the workationer becomes covered by the destination social security scheme, which you don't want because you want the employee to remain covered by the social security scheme in the home country. But that's also where the second part of this risk comes in. There is technically also a risk that the individual would drop out of this home country social security risk, this scheme. The third one, labor law, basically the risk that local labor law in the destination country becomes applicable on this employment, although of course the employment is governed already by the home country labor law, for instance, Germany, and you don't want Spanish or Mexican or whatever labor law to kick in and change this, basically. Then we've got visa and immigration. So it's a little different because there, of course, you need a permission to work. So it's a right to work. The question is the workationer even allowed to work in the destination country? And of course, you could think, isn't it the problem of the employee if he or she is not allowed to do this? Of course it is, but it's also yours as the employer, because if you would still allow this individual to work from the destination country without having a valid work title, it would actually technically be considered, let's say, enabling illegal labor, for which the penalties are extreme. And of course, they were never written for workationers. Maybe that is a general remark. None of the rules that you're looking at are were written for workationers. They didn't exist. And also sometimes it's a little difficult to apply the rules on this very new use case of workationers. For visa and immigration, we at WorkFlex always say, technically the employee might be considered as a tourist, so it doesn't even require a visa, but it's a little bit too easy to say this. So we always perform a business traveler assessment and say, okay, is the workationer allowed to work in the destination country as a business traveler, or does he or she require an actual permit for this? And if he or she does, that's usually where we draw the line, because back to slide 1, we're talking about offering a benefit. We're not talking about constituting an employer burden. And there's always a burden involved if there's a business traveler permit required. Of course, the employee might be able to request it, him or herself, but there will also always be some type of support required from you as the employer. And the last one, data security. Of course, if your employee takes his or his laptop abroad and starts working, he or she might trigger a data security breach. You just want to make sure as an employer that you are GDPR or whatever data regulations apply in your case are fulfilled. So this is a summary, and I see a question coming in from Jörg. Do you know any case where have been a compliance issue within the EU, works less than 30 days abroad? If that's a very good question, as long as you carry. So yeah, very good question. That's actually 2 in 1. And I think I even wanted to drill down on this. Yes, exactly. So great timing, Jörg, thank you. Because we hear this a lot in the market that, but below 30 days, it's all good, right? Well, maybe one step back. None of these risks and regulations were written for workationers, as I already mentioned, but you can at least apply them. But let's also be clear. There is no law, and I'm just quickly thinking, maybe a little bit around employment tax, but for all others, there is no threshold of 30 days in the regulations for this. This 30 days is made up in the market. And I'm not saying it's a bad threshold. I'm just saying that it doesn't exist. I think there was a question before we started this webinar already saying, hey, isn't there this regulation EU-wide or so that says 30 days or below, no risk? No, that rule does not exist. It's really made up by the market. So what I do think that if you have a policy that is below 30 days and only the EU, the likelihood that a compliance risk arises is pretty low. There's exceptions, and we can talk about them later. The likelihood is pretty low, but it's really not impossible. And anyone who tells you differently is lying. So I also think, by the way, if your policy says 30 days and within the EU, you're not really offering a benefit, but we'll also get to that later. So to get to your question, Jörg, do you know any case where there was a compliance within the EU when the workation was only shorter than 30 days? Yes or no? I don't know of an individual case that went wrong. Because no, simply don't. As I said, chances is relatively low, but I do know examples where for the employer that had a policy of only 30 days and within the EU, where it still went wrong. And it has something to do with what you see as number 2 here on this slide. It has something to do with the accumulation of workationers. Only if people go for shorter durations, there still might be an accumulation problem. The A1, how do I say this? And there was also a question on A1. Let me quickly. Exactly. So there was a question that also was submitted up front. There's a rumor that an A1 certificate is not required for a stay up to 30 days within the EU. However, the authorities say this certificate is always necessary. What's the truth? So, Jörg, let me combine it with your question. An A1 in general is never a 100% need to have, because an A1 only confirms, let's say, a legal situation. And the sheer fact that you have a confirmation of this doesn't mean that the situation is any different if you don't have the statement. I hope that's clear. So let's say I'm saying, hey, I've got AirPods here. I happen to have AirPods. If I ask now Apple to confirm in writing that these are AirPods, that's great. They confirm these are AirPods. But if Apple does not put this in writing and say, oh, Pieter, you've got AirPods there, doesn't mean that these are not AirPods, right? That's the same with the A1. It's not necessarily a need to have, but it's a very nice to have. And the thing is, with below 30 days, I don't see a difference between 30 days or 35 days, to be honest. An A1 is always a very nice to have. And I think in Germany especially, it is common practice to always request them. It's also not extremely difficult, and it's just a very simple feature to provide your employee with when they're going on a workation. So I also see a question on Post-Up Worker Directive. Thank you very much, Pia. Great question. Let me quickly continue first on this 30 days, what can go wrong, because to be honest, a little bit annoyed by the fact that people there must be people that really communicate 30 days is not a problem. It's a low risk maybe, but it's still a problem. Why is that? Well, also within Europe, you can see it here, we've got service PE concepts. So especially in the Czech Republic, they're very eager to look at the accumulated presence, as we talked about before, of workationers or business travelers into that country. And 30 days for one individual might be good, but if you've got 6 individuals going on a 30-day workation, or also adding some business trips in the process, you can easily exceed that 183-day threshold, which is usually relevant for service PEs. Also, Portugal recently adopted some kind of a service PE policy. It's a little bit unclear how this is exactly going to play out, but again, their accumulation is definitely relevant. Not only 30 days of workation, but it's also the business trips or the private trips even of the individual to that destination, let alone if there's additional employees or other employees also traveling to that location. And there's always some other high-risk countries, especially from a corporate tax perspective. Austria and Belgium are good examples. And the 30-day policy doesn't save you in those countries, especially if we go to the second point here, accumulation. Well, we've seen examples of delivery platforms that constituted PEs despite a 30-day policy within the EU, but also outside the EU. So really don't be fooled. You can still run into especially PE risks if you have a very restricted policy like this. Sorry, Tanya, very good question. PE means permanent establishment. So if we go back to the risks, it's the corporate tax risk. So in German, it would be Betriebsstätte. In Dutch, it would be vaste inrichting. And it basically means a PE is a local corporate tax liability. Sorry for this. I thought I always use it. It's a little bit, let's say, I don't know the English word for this. But anyway, so that's what PE means. PE is corporate tax risk. Also important, if you only have a 30-day policy and you think that that's not an issue at all, you will not manage it and there will be no audit trail. So if shit, excusez le mot, hits the fan, you will have no, let's say, documentation, no audit trail whatsoever to defend, other than maybe a piece of paper that says, yeah, but you weren't allowed to go only 30 days, so what can go wrong, right? Doesn't really help you. It's not a strong story. And that's also, let's say, a point made under 4. If you don't have any management, you don't know what you don't know. And I think that's also important to state. Now, there's always 2 factors to compliance risk, right? First, you'd have to actually do something wrong. And then secondly, there's a chance of being caught. And the sheer fact that you may have a low chance of being caught because it's only 30 days, because it's only within the EU, right? And maybe because in your country, tax audits do not take place very often or something like this. Yeah, does it mean that you're doing a, let's say, good job? I think there's a very healthy trend going on over the last 5 to 10 years in the Netherlands, but also in other European countries like Germany and Belgium, where compliance very clearly is not something, is not about making a mistake, but it's about doing things right and managing it in a, let's say, manner. So 30 days, yes, low risk, but no risk, it does not work like this, unfortunately. So maybe back to the risk, because Pia, that's for your question. Does the EU Posted Worker Directive also apply to workationers? Besides Belgium, are there other EU countries that require this? So from what we know, no. Belgium is the only country, it's basically the exception that confirms the rule that say, or that have converted the EU Posted Worker Directive in such a way that also workationers are covered by it. But all other countries, A, seem to have converted it in a way that it doesn't apply to workationers, so that would already mean good news. And B, at WorkFlex, we have confirmations from, I think, all other EU destination countries that indeed confirm that they will not apply the Posted Worker Directive to workationers, which means there is no notification requirement. But yeah, in Belgium, there is. Thank God it's not extremely difficult in Belgium. And as I said at the beginning, we're now working actually on a business travel compliance solution here at WorkFlex 2, which does, of course, include PWD and doing posted worker notifications. So we might even go the extra compliant way and just simply notify authorities, at least for business trips, but also maybe even for workationers. So for Belgium, this can already be done. EU Postal Workers Directive applies to the Netherlands too. Yeah, a very good point, Francois. The Dutch government confirmed to us that it's not. And then there's always 2 points, right? Sometimes if an authority makes a statement to you, but it's clearly not in line with what the law states, of course, the statement that you got is incorrect. But I think the law in the Netherlands is also pretty clear. And it says, The Posted Worker Directive in the Netherlands is only required, maybe even for certain sectors, but also especially if the individual is sent to perform local services. And it's clear that a workationer is not sent. The workationer is allowed, but you can still doubt it, right? I wouldn't say it's necessary to doubt it because it's pretty clear the individual is not posted. But second, the individual will at least not be performing local services in the Netherlands because the employee will continue. As I said at the beginning, this is going to be important, and here we are. The individual will remain to provide services for the home country and not for the for any entity or client in the destination country. So that to Posted Worker Directive, and I hope that's clear. And that's also, by the way, why they're not on this overview, because I think by now everybody's quite comfortable that Posted Worker Directive, other than in Belgium, is not a topic for workationers. You could technically make it a part of labor law, of course, but we do not consider it a separate topic other than for Belgium. Quickly scanning my list of questions here if there was any other questions on PWD. No, so that's pretty good. If there's any other questions on PWD from your end, of course, please feel free to put them in the chat. All right, very good. So quickly going through the other questions that I have here. I've got one more slide that I want to talk about, but I'm not going to pull it on screen yet. Let me first go through the other questions that were sent in from your end so that they're at least covered. I'm conscious of time. We only have 15 minutes or so left. So the first question was, how do you prevent your employees from going on a workations secretly? It's a very good question. And the answer is, of course, you can try your very best, but you cannot exclude the possibility. You can hear a lawyer talking. You can never exclude the possibility that an employee still goes without notifying, right? Even if you have WorkFlex implemented, even if you have whatever type of measures in place to find out where the employee is working from, if the employee really wants to work from abroad and they really don't want you to know, they will go. The thing is, if you have your policy and your WorkFlex in place nicely, and shit would still hit the fan in this case that the employee did not ask your permission or didn't notify you at all, then we're pretty certain that you will be able to hold the employee responsible for any consequences there, because you've done everything as an employer, and the employee very clearly did not comply with internal policy, which you've also communicated and made very easy to follow. So yeah, there is no way of truly preventing your employees from doing something basically out of your sight. In our practice or in our experience, people will not try to basically go abroad without asking you if you have a proper policy and you have a process like WorkFlex in place. Then they will use it. They will go on workation secretly if you have shut the door on them and just told them, no, it's not happening here. Then you have a pretty solid risk of them still going because they can work from home or whatever. They can change their background and they can turn their VPN on and they will still do it. So I think the solution here probably is just give them a policy, give them a process, and then you will be able to manage it unless there's a very, let's say, eager employee that wants to actively be in compliance. Yeah, and those probably you don't even want to have in your workforce, right? Saying this between us here. So I saw a question coming in again, Jörg, thank you very much. Regarding PE, do you know any real case in other countries, in other EU countries except Czech Republic and Portugal where PE? I think I know in Italy and Austria, although this wasn't necessarily workationers, it was actually partially business trips too. So I'm just thinking. But maybe a couple of disclaimers, Jörg. I'm not a know-it-all. So we have seen 10,000 workations in the past years. And of course, in my career, I've seen a little bit more business trips. But yeah, I've only seen a fraction here. Also, so that's disclaimer one. Disclaimer two, companies are usually not very proud if they've constituted a PE as part of a workation or a business trip. It's very bad for your brand, so it will usually not be communicated externally. So I don't know what's not out there. That's disclaimer two. Disclaimer three is, of course, we can continue, right? Saying, I've also seen it in Austria and Italy, and that you now come back to a question saying, okay, but like besides the Czech Republic, Portugal, Austria, and Italy, have you seen other countries? I've not seen PEs in all countries related to workations, but also because not all countries are very, let's say, hot and happening workation destination countries, right? So if you, for instance, think of, well, let's think of another country which is a little bit PE specific, Belgium. Yeah, there's not a lot of workationers going to Belgium, but there are a lot of business travels, of course, taking place to Belgium. So that's why I haven't seen an example in Belgium. Doesn't mean that there's no risk. So just a couple of disclaimers there. 30 days might become an issue. The thing is, right, you can always take a little bit of risk. And if you all feel that 30 days is okay, then go ahead. But from the questions, I also feel that, yeah, it doesn't feel completely comfortable. Then make sure you've got a policy, make sure you've got a management in place. Then you won't have to worry. Even if you allow much more than 30 days, there's a management in place that tracks it and basically flags for you and saying, hey, there's now accumulated presence in whatever country, or there's a specific case that needs a little bit of more attention, so that you can really basically offer this benefit more or less risk-free. So that to PE. Just quickly looking at my other questions. What additional cost can employers expect when they decide to offer workations to employees? That's a good question. We see that in practice a lot, right? Is there an obligation for you as an employer to pay for anything because you've allowed it? Or is there a, let's say, a moral obligation or a best practice obligation to do something as an employer? And the pretty clear answer to this is no. Don't worry, right? Of course, make sure you've got your paperwork in place that says, dear employer, dear employee, we can allow you to go somewhere, but it doesn't mean that we have a responsibility based on labor law to also reimburse any costs for this. It's your decision, and you are on your own responsible for the financial consequences of that decision. So no, you won't have to pay per diems, you don't have to pay tickets, all of this. The only thing that might happen that might lead to additional costs, of course, is if something goes wrong. The employee simply works there and slips. There's a professional accident, or there's at least an accident. Then the question comes up, is it indeed a professional accident for which you as an employer are liable, just as for any other professional accident that you would be liable for? If the employee works in the office, if the employee works from his or her home office in the country of employment, also if the employee works from the Airbnb in Spain, a professional accident remains a professional accident. So I always use the example, it's not the coolest example, I know, but it's just, let's say, a very clear example. If my company laptop explodes in my face, it doesn't really matter where I am, right? It's a professional accident for which my employer is liable. And of course, if the employee then is in a different country than the country of employment, that may lead to some additional complexities. And that's why at WorkFlex, we always provide a travel health insurance on behalf of our clients for the employees. We don't tell the employees, you have to make sure you've got your own private travel health insurance in place, because you never know whether their insurance is good, whether they really have it, or they just say, yeah, I've got my insurance, but it's really not there. And if they did this, even if the professional accident, of course, you are still liable. So that's why we say, prevent this discussion. Make sure as an employer you have a travel health insurance, either through WorkFlex, or of course you can also get one on your own. What I've seen in practice also is that clients simply use their business travel, health insurance for workationers too. It's not ideal, but it's usually a good, let's say, workaround. There was also a separate question, even how do you tackle the topic of insurances? So I hope that was sufficiently answered. Pia, I see another question from you coming in. Thank you very much. Do you have a recommendation for dealing with working students, apprentices, interns, or dual students? Is there anything special to take into account? That's a good question. I think there's always two things that usually matter here. One, it's a business topic rather than a compliance topic. You've got working students and interns, etc., working at your company because they usually need a lot of support, guidance, and they want to get the feel for the business. And I've seen at clients, as a result of this, the simple rule for students or working students, interns, the workation policy does not apply. It's okay. It's a business decision. Of course, I may have an opinion, but I can also follow it. Just for instance, as I've seen policy rules that say for people that are still in their probation period, the workation policy does not apply. I've seen everything in practice. I do think that now more and more workations are considered a benefit, and companies are trying to expand possibilities. We'll get to talk to about that in a second too. Of course, you can make your policy very restrictive, but of course, you're not making it any sexier by doing it. So also the 30 days, limiting it to the EU countries only or to EU citizens only, it's not very much appreciated, at least for those people that, as a result of this, are excluded from the policy. And same goes, of course, for interns and students. So I do see now more and more with our clients, but I'm appreciative of the fact that our clients are usually, let's say, early adopters of this topic. That they are more and more also allowing their interns for doing this. One really cool example, looking at the time, still works. What we've seen now is that working students that go abroad for a semester, that usually were always, let's say, let go at a client, that the client now adopted, let's say, a special workation or work flex arrangement for those working students, saying, hey, if you are going abroad for a semester, you can simply continue to work for us in your, let's say, home country for those couple of months. And after you return back to Germany, it happens to be the country of the employer. If you return back to Germany, we don't have to search for a new working student because you're still there. And also you as the working student, you don't have to look for a new side job because you've just always remained with us. So yeah, you've seen everything here, Emmanuel. Thanks for the question. I think the cool thing is, or sorry, Pia, I think you can actually see it as an opportunity in maybe solving some of the hiring problems that you have with these individuals. Question from Emmanuel. Company has multiple offices in different countries. If an employee from Berlin wants to work for 5 months in another country where the employee already has an office, can the company delegate the work to the entity in that country, or WorkFlex has an advantage on that? That's a very good question. Of course, as soon as I see 5 months, I'm like, okay, 5 months, but did the employee already go there for another couple of days? Are we closing in on 183 days, yes or no? That's concern one, but assuming it's really just 5 months, I think there's two things that you can do. Of course, you can make this a true delegation, an expat or so, as a result of which there's intercompany transactions going on and the employee will come to work for the benefit of the destination country. I think that's a little bit of a hassle. Also, I think it's probably not correct because the employee, assumingly, the employee will simply continue to work for the company in Berlin, so for the German entity. And as a result of this, if you don't do intercompany billing from the German entity to the destination entity, you would still be in compliance. Probably better here would be to say you're going there for 5 months, which is below 183 days. Through WorkFlex, you can solve this. You can remain on the payroll in the home country. You can remain socially secured in the home country. There's nothing that you have to do with the destination country other than make sure that this employee doesn't constitute a PE there. And for that, it might actually be better to say, we do have a local entity or a local office there, but we don't really care about it. We want you to work from your Airbnb or your home because you have nothing to do with the local entity there. This is quite a complex topic, Emmanuel. If you have questions on this, like follow-up questions on this, please feel free to reach out. Just looking at the time, I'm also going to try to answer your second question before pulling on my last slide and thanking you for being here. So we've got here the second question. What's the legal ground that workation is not considered a business travel? Is there any legal risk for the company if an employee has No, so no, not labor law wise, Emmanuel. It's a very good question. You can basically simply say we will not reimburse the cost, and that's fine. If the employee accepts this is a private, let's say, agreement, and it's all good. The thing is, more visa and immigration wise, a business traveler for visa and immigration is usually only someone who goes on like visits clients locally, or goes on to a conference locally. There's a limited list of things that are considered to, let's say, make up for a business travel. And workation or regular work is not one of them. So as a result, you could technically say that a workationer does not qualify as a business traveler because he's not going on a conference, not visiting clients, just doing his or her job is not one of the tasks that are considered a business trip. So that's why it's not a business trip. There's two things playing in here, right? First, workationers were, of course, never a topic when this list was made. I think if now people would include business workations as well to make an official part of business travel. And second, right, back in the day when people were going on a business trip, going to a conference and maybe also visiting a client in between, there would be 2 or 3 days in between that the individual would stay in whatever the destination is, and he or she would just do her work. Back in the day, we never thought this was a problem, and now all of a sudden, when we're talking workation, people tend to make a problem out of this. I think this is incorrect. I think if you're doing regular work for a short time only, you would still have to qualify as a business traveler. At least it's the best qualification that you have in the visa and immigration world. We've got confirmations from many, especially European countries, who've confirmed this, but also, for instance, the US have confirmed this. So that should be safe at least here. But it's a little bit of an unclear situation because of this new thing. And of course, regulations do not change very fast. All right, looking at the time, only 1 minute left. 30 days has been a hot topic, and I also just want to make sure that we're aligned, right? So 30 days, what can go wrong? There's still a couple of things that can go wrong, but there's especially a lot of things that can go better. 30 days, does it feel like a benefit? Yes or no? I don't think so nowadays. And we've got a pretty cool anecdote, by the way, from the Global Mobility Lead at Bosch in a previous webinar, where she also said, well, people were fine with 54 days for a month or two, and now they're already starting to ask if we get more days. 30 days is not a real benefit. You're very restrictive in your policy. Same goes for point number 2. If you're only allowing for EU destinations, you're not offering a benefit, and I would really urge and encourage you to do this and to consider destination countries outside the EU too, especially if you have also an international workforce that want to visit their families for a little bit longer, because for many of our clients, this is actually a bigger use case than the use case of workations going to Spain, Italy, or Greece. So make it a benefit. It's a strategic decision. Of course, if you feel like you just have to allow workations, it's fine. But if you want to make it a benefit, it's a strategic decision, and you should expand the policy a little bit more. And point 4 is something specific for WorkFlex. We do offer no-risk workations. It's actually a feature that we've recently invented and put on the market. So if you want to learn more about still offering workations above and beyond 30 days in the EU, with, let's say, a no-risk workations coverage, where we take the full responsibility for your workations, then please reach out. And we're, of course, happy to tell you all about this. You could see that I was speeding up a little bit because I'm aware that I'm over time right now, but this was also the last slide, and I've gone through more or less all questions here. Yes, I can send it, Rohit, of course. I think this is always available on Demio anyway, but we will share the link. We'll share the slides as well. If there's any other questions, of course, please feel free to just send them over through email or LinkedIn. And otherwise, I thank you very much for being here. And then I will stop the recording and wish you a happy rest of your Wednesday. Thank you.